Good afternoon, as it is here. We're here with PoliticIt. The guest today is the man who's usually behind the camera asking the questions. This day he's answering the questions, Senator John, and we're going to have John have you tell us a little bit about what took place with this last legislative session. And so,
well, I think of the word historic because it really was historic. I mean, we started out with some controversial issues. When we talk about when we talk about ending puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones on children, right? Anyone less than 18 years old, no more transgender surgeries. Those were pretty heavy lifts. Mike Kennedy did a marvelous job in kind of threading that discussion. And, nobody really wants to be, say absolutely none of this needs to go on. When people have, they're of a mature age and they understand exactly what they're doing, they can have those rights. But when we start talking about children and kids that, we won't let them smoke, we won't
give them an opportunity to go to the bar.
Yeah, but yet, we allow other things to happen, which may not be totally driven by them. So I think that was a heavy lift. The other thing that we did early on was the school choice. There's a lot of people in the state that really believed that we had to do that. And I know that generated some controversy with teachers and others thinking that we were really condemning the public education system. In reality,
gave them a raise.
Yeah, over $250 million, right, for a raise that goes directly to the teachers. And then we had another bill, which I actually co-sponsored, that put a index on that, so that part of their raise will continue to grow with inflation, which I think is important. And that bill provided around $40 million for scholarships to students whose parents wanted to exit the school system, not necessarily because of anything wrong, but with the idea that there might be a better choice for their child. And I think that's important. But, when you talk about public ed, though, I mean, we provided another 16% increase in what's called the WPU, over that actually. So education was funded better than we've ever funded it before.
Well, and it's an interesting topic because, growing up when perhaps we did, because we're similar in age, when you talked education, it was the basics. It was reading, writing, arithmetic, and some of those, core things. But certainly one of the things that has been a reality of our time is how education has now got a dimension of what is the curriculum? What is the best for our children? And, certainly there's not a similarity of belief among all people, because when you talk about the gender-affirming surgery and things like that, it's within a lot of times the school system that those concepts are brought out, and there's an effort to bring those concepts out more. And that's really a different world than, say, we came from.
Right. Well, I think there's a lot of those concepts that parents don't want their kids to be exposed to. I mean, last year we had a bill on pornography in the school libraries, and everybody in the news is saying, well, why do we want to ban books? But I can tell you, when I read some of the things that were in those books, I could fully understand why. And, I think you talked about reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? After COVID, I mean, there was a massive learning loss during COVID. If you look at how the scores were set back, I just got a report from the auditors in the state, and one of the best schools in the state had a 95% graduation rate, but not even 50% reading comprehension rate.
Yeah.
You think about that. That is unacceptable, right? If we really believe in equity, we would give everybody a good education.
Yeah, teach them to, to do the basics still. I think one of the things that's interesting is because of the dynamics of COVID, we took a lot of children who, many of whom, didn't really spend a lot of time on the computer. Some did, many didn't, but we put them in an environment where all of a sudden the computer now is their source of learning, and they interact with teachers and they do that kind of an education, but they also now were exposed, not that I'm suggesting that being on the computer is a bad thing, but they were exposed to a much broader, list on that computer of, be it lifestyle, be it ideas that for young minds kind of blew some of those young minds. And I think, that's another dimension besides not being in the classroom that is probably pushing some things which I believe are more fad than reality, even though there's some bona fide individuals who need a specific kind of, landscape to learn in and to grow. But many have learned fads that are not constructive in the school system. And I'm not being real specific, but
right. Well, and just looking at my own children, some of them did well in that environment, right? My daughter's a perfect example of someone that can really learn a lot on her own. And so not all children do the same, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why this school choice was really just about that. It was a choice for the parents to find a better fit for their kids. And I think that's important. But going back to that other question, though, I think it's really important that we get back to basics in education, right? A child should learn to read. They should learn to do math. They should learn how to write complete sentences, right? I mean, rather than just tweets. Kids need to learn grammar. They need to learn basic structures because that's what gives them the next level, right? What job can you go do if you never learn to read and you never learn to write and you never learn basic math? Mm-hmm. It's tough. And if I really think, and I said this before, if we really believe in equity, we would give all children a good education.
And I think you did a lot of good things in that umbrella of education. We don't have time to go through everything, but I think that was clearly one of the priorities. A lot of good things happened. Hopefully, just in a parting thought, that we also sent the message that really ultimately in the life of a child, parent is number one, and that school choice does give that empowerment to the parent, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. And it's out of a concern. We're not trying to destroy public education. Since I've been there, we've had more than $2.5 billion increase to the core budget in primary education. That's huge. And we've had historic increases. This past year was the biggest one we'd ever done. And so I think that should be a strong signal that we care about teachers, that we care about education, that we care about public education.
Yeah, I think you sent that well. Other topics, one of them that's really high on everyone's mind that was addressed in varying degrees by the legislative session was water. And I've got to commend you because the problem was drought of many years now. And for the legislature to be able to pass legislation that has created all of this snowfall, as our hats off to you. Yeah. But talk to us a little bit about water. And we hear about Great Salt Lake.
We care about the Great Salt Lake. We have problems with pollution coming off of the lake. We address that in a bill. We've got problems with a lake that's losing water, right? And we've got mineral companies out there that are affected by that. A lot of the mining on the lake is done by evaporation, so that causes more problems with the lake. But I think we worked out a lot of those things. Now, fortunately, we've had one of the best snowfalls we've had in a whole generation in a way, right? I mean, we're at record levels at in the mountains, the snowpack that we have, and I think,
we hope it warms slowly.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is Governor Cox actually put in his budget money to fix all of the pumps that we bought during Bangerter's term in office, right when we were having massive floods. And so, that's actually kind of interesting because we have now had a record snowfall, and we need a few more years like this to really get the lake back where it needs to be. But I'm glad that we're looking at conservation issues,
reclamation.
Yeah, we're looking at ways to save water, to treat it like the basis of life that it is, right? And so that's going to help us into the future.
Well, and I think, some habits were formed among a lot of people because of the, drought looming over our heads. I know when I'd get in the shower, and I know your mind sees in pictures, so picture muscles. But I took a 5-gallon bucket in with me because my shower takes a minute or so to heat up. But there's quite a bit of water just going down the drain, and I used that 5-gallon bucket, my wife did, to water plants and grow vegetables and to try and conserve water. And hopefully people will realize that's never a bad idea. We should continue to conserve and not have the feeling that, we're flush now with water. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, the people of Utah really responded when we started talking about water conservation because we ended up saving a lot of water with that. So it's good that that's on our minds.
A burnt lawn last year was a good sign. It was a way of saying I'm part of the team in a way.
Yeah.
If people found ways to make their lawn super green with some water conserving ways, they need to share that. But I know I had a burnt lawn. It was pretty ugly, but I
think a lot of us did, didn't we?
That was kind of a badge of honor. It's interesting when you talk about water. I didn't realize this, but did you realize and this isn't a question, but under the southern part of Idaho is an aquifer the size of Lake Erie?
I did not know that.
Aquifers are interesting, and most people don't ever think about an aquifer, out of sight, out of mind, but you also did some things with aquifers and trying to make healthy aquifers in Utah.
Yeah. I think there's really a lot of legislation that was focused on water because that was the biggest issue coming into this legislative session. But all the conservation that we did actually meant less water made it to the Great Salt Lake. And that's something that was on the mind of everybody when we went into this session. How do we make sure the lake doesn't die completely? How do we take care of that issue by itself? I didn't realize myself that when the lake's down, we don't have the same lake effects, which means we don't have the same snowfall that we normally would. So,
which is hard to explain this year.
Yeah. This has been a great year.
Yeah. One thing is for certain, we really don't control quite as much as we think we do at times. But we're grateful when we've got the surplus that we do. I know Kevin, the producer, likes to take a little break here, mostly so that he can run out and get a candy bar or something. So we're going to take a short break. We're going to come back and start out maybe talking about housing.
Okay.
And Kevin says we're back. So we're back, and we're going to talk first about housing, then we're going to talk about taxes, which most people perks their ears up a little. But first, housing. And maybe I could start by saying I've got a son. I've got 5 sons. But one of them now, who's the youngest, truly believes he'll never own a home. He's making a living, but he's thinking, I'll never be able to afford a home. Utah's gone through an explosion of home prices and home building, but housing provides a number of dimensions of concern. So talk to us about how the legislature
the focus in the legislature really has been on multifamily. How do we provide low-income housing? But this year, President Adams actually ran a bill, which I thought was interesting, where they provided a fund where you could get a $25,000 loan. It's really a loan that gets paid back slowly over time, and it's supposed to build a permanent fund for first-time home buyers. And the focus, though, is on, homes that are on small lots that people can actually afford. And I think we need to start looking at that again, because home ownership has always been an American ideal, I think. And you're right, as our children get older, they get employed, it's getting harder and harder to buy that first home. And that home becomes a store of wealth for individuals, right? It's probably the biggest asset they'll ever own. And over time, they're paying that off. So as they get at later stages, they actually have an asset that they live in that decreases the cost of living, right? And so home ownership was a big theme. And I really, a lot of times when I hear affordable housing in a legislative session, I think more of government housing, right? And I think we have to create the right incentives for home builders. And one of the things I don't like is some of the legislation we had, which forced changes in zoning at the local level, because I think those decisions are best made on your city council or at the county level for unincorporated areas. But so, how can we help without hurting?
Well, and I think the other thing that comes with that is, for those who do own a home and have owned it for maybe many years and they see their equity increasing, that's a good thing. That's a good feeling. But to recognize that there also has to be an opportunity for the first-time home buyer and those who are struggling to afford a home, that we look for ways to make that also a possibility. Sometimes, and maybe this is before I get to taxation, because property taxes come into play. And if the property taxes continue to grow, if somebody has stretched to get a home, they're stretching with their bank and their mortgage, and then property taxes can sometimes be a death knell. And property taxes, especially I know Weber County, where I am at, they increased significantly.
Yes, they did. And what a lot of people don't recognize is that Utah has a law on truth in taxation. And, everybody knows that their homes went up in value, right? Right around 30%, really. And, due to the shortage of housing and the number of people that were moving in. The demand increased tremendously. We had one of the highest growth rates of any state. And so that put pressure on that market that wasn't immediately ready to respond. But what people don't realize is if the appraisal come in 30% higher, the mill rate actually has to go down to keep the revenue the same, unless the county or the city or the school district holds a truth in taxation hearing. Well, I think there was a rush to have those everywhere, right? I think some people didn't even realize they were going on. But that is a problem. I mean, you save all your life to pay off your home, and then you have to rent it from the government after you retire, right?
Yeah, and I think, that's one of the things when it comes to a local property tax, a county property tax, when we see a 30% rise in valuation, that doesn't stay forever, it doesn't continue. When we see a lowering of that value, we seldom, if ever, see a lowering of a property tax. And so it's the age-old, it's easy to raise them, but you never see them lowered.
Yeah. Well, one thing we did at the legislature, which people don't realize, is we actually cut property tax. Now, how did we do that? The state portion of property tax is very, very small. But it was around over $100 million, because we halved our mill rate at the state level. Now, a lot of people don't see a lot, maybe $100 or so on their tax, because the bulk of property tax comes from the city and the county and the school district, right?
And counties are tempted, like it or not, are tempted to say we're having to pay less towards the state, but people are used to it, so we hang on to it.
Right.
And that's, it's unfortunate. I think taxes is the other thing that is discouraging to, say, someone like my son. If you put too many of those barriers and hurdles in front of people, and if they're being wise, because we've seen what not being wise does. In 2008, we'd given so many people loans that really couldn't afford the loans, that we saw a real, a lot of damage that came from that.
Right.
I worry that we've just gone through a time when a lot of people had to come up with more money. How many of you have heard stories out there where your neighbor was selling their house and they had 10 offers, and the people that bought the house had to offer 50,000 more or 80,000 more than you were asking in order to get it? That was almost like a game. But in a similar way, that's not going to continue. It's not continuing now. Things don't.
In fact, housing's going down a little bit
Exactly.
now, right? It's going to level out, and how do we deal with that? I mean, we're having issues right now that we need to deal with. And that's why property tax, for instance, I think it's one of the worst ways to tax people, because it's a tax you can't avoid. If
there's not much choice if you're a homeowner.
Yeah, if you're a homeowner, you sell your home, you move into a smaller home, but that home's valued more too, right? And so it's kind of hard to avoid that tax. Now, as far as taxes are concerned, our biggest tax cut came on income tax. And if you think about it, income taxes is one of the worst taxes because it taxes productivity. And if you tax productivity, people are less likely to want to work hard, right? Or long hours, right? As those taxes go up, people work less. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what we want to happen. We want more productivity because that growth can actually grow us out of some of the difficulties we're in. So we had, again this year, historic cuts in income taxes.
I think you also, another thing that is dear to my heart is, Social Security is not just a check and it's untouchable by anyone. It's touched by federal and state governments, and it's taxed. And you did something with Social Security.
Yeah, we actually, and this is one that hasn't been talked about a lot in the press. And it's something that I had several constituents say, look, I'm retired. I live off Social Security. I have a pension fund. As I draw from my pension fund, it may push me just over the limit, which means that now my Social Security is taxed. Because the Social Security isn't taxed until you reach a certain level. If all you get is Social Security, your Social Security isn't touched. Well, one of the things we did in this legislative session is we raised that limit. So now in Utah, if you make less than $75,000 a year, which many of our seniors do, including their pensions, then we don't tax their Social Security. And so that's, I think that's a huge win.
And that's great news. I think sometimes, I've heard that President Biden is promising that there'll be no tax increases on anyone over $400,000 income, which many of us say, well, yeah, that's really very few of my neighbors, and people that are making that much, but kind of a promise not to tax below that rate. But sometimes that isn't the reality of what happens. And things like Social Security, a younger person, if you talk to young people today, they say, oh, Social Security won't be there when I'm there. And so that is a concern, and I know we can't go into depth talking about Social Security, but at least there's an effort to say, help seniors who are living on Social Security who may bump over the limit, but still are not making a huge amount of money.
Yeah. And I think at the federal level, we need to do something to shore up Social Security so it will go on a lot longer. And I think there's efforts being made, but man, we're spending too much money.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, because the thing that really, if you draw a picture, it's the base supporting, the triangle of seniors at the top, and people start to see an inverted triangle that if less, is coming in, or that more is going to other programs, that you do start to get top heavy on Social Security and people lose confidence. So anything in a direction of shoring up Social Security for all of us is a good thing.
Yeah.
What other kinds of things? I know we talked housing, but homelessness was a topic.
Well, it's interesting. there were a lot of discussions on homelessness. I think in Weber County, we do as good a job as anybody. And I really mean that because, most of these people are known by name. In fact, we have a homeless advocate at the police, at Ogden City Police. And I've had her on my podcast, and let me tell you, she knows the names of all these people and cares about them. And, some of the homelessness is hard to solve. People get addicted to drugs and other things, and
or have emotional or mental issues that.
And those are really sad cases, and we need to look at that whole idea, which Ogden has done a good job at. There's a number of people that have really made an effort to look at homelessness around the person rather than individual programs, right? And so you say, okay, there needs to be a number of things that come to play. So if a mother maybe gets divorced, has unusual expenses, they may lose their home and where they're living and have to live in their car. And we have some really great people in Ogden, Weber County, who can take someone like that and say, okay, we're gonna work on benefits that you might be able to receive to get you past this tough period. Those we've done a pretty good job with. Mm-hmm. And I'm proud to be from Weber County because we really do a good job. In fact, there was a bill that came up for homeless shelters where, I kind of felt like Utah County was trying to get out of some of the things that we're trying to push forward. Weber County's already stood up and built the shelter, because this isn't just a Salt Lake County issue; it's a Wasatch Front issue.
Sure.
And we all need to do our part, and I think Weber County's done a very good job. And but we don't have to do it by ourselves, and Salt Lake County doesn't have to do it by themselves. We all need to come together and try to find solutions for that.
Well, let me ask you, time's always upon us, but give us your estimation of what you called it a historic legislative session. Tell us just a little bit about are you inspired when you're there? Do you rub shoulders with people that inspire you?
Yeah,
are we in good hands?
I think we are in really good hands. And there's some issues that we're going to have to deal with. One of the there's discussions that have to take place. There are things that we can do during the interim to kind of just tweak some of the things that are going on. And so I think that's an important thing. I think in general, we have some fabulous people. I mean, you look at overall the bills, when you talk about dealing with school choice issues, with taxation, with critical race theory. We had a bill that I thought was very historic, that handled it in a very decent way. When we talk about, transitions of kids from one gender to another, we try to move that as far as we can in the future so that kids aren't affected by it the same way. I mean, we had an administrative rule, for instance, in Utah that basically said that a psychologist can only use gender-affirming psychology. And, it was in response to some things that were happening that weren't very good in our history, where we tried to do conversion therapies, right? But now we actually had a bill passed that basically said, let psychologists do their job. Mm-hmm. There's some discussions that can take place, and they need to have the flexibility to do what's right for children. And so that what I thought was historic. I thought that, we had a lot of tweaks to laws that we needed, but we handled some difficult issues.
So among all the things that took place in the legislative session, I know there was some attention paid to ESG. What is that, and what discussions took place?
ESG is environment, social, and governance scores. And what's happened is, AOC couldn't get her Green New Deal passed. what's interesting to me is the financial sector. Some of the really big investment brokers, actually, decided we were going to have this score, and it's actually part of the Davos, experience.
World Economic Forum.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum.
That problem.
And,
I hope for
and
that.
ESG stands for Environment, Social, and Governance Scores. And it's an attempt by the financial sector to actually enforce investments in or away from these types of things. So if you don't have the right attitude about the environment, and I use air quotes to say the right, right? Because, or governance is actually who's on your board, what's the makeup, how many groups are represented, is that equitable, is it diverse, and so you think about that. Are the right people included? All of these things come up, and they generate investments that may not be on the risk-return frontier. So from a risk-return perspective, they may not be the best things from a financial standpoint, but they benefit other things. So, and those other things are social causes. So we have companies like BlackRock who has, they manage trillions of dollars of our money, right? And their big push now is to put it into these socially responsible investments. Well, I don't have any problem with people investing their own money in a socially responsible way. They should be able to. But how do we deal with it when they're doing it with our money and we don't really understand what they're doing?
And it's a not that old of an issue. It's kind of a new issue, and it can certainly affect where investment goes, because now people have a say that's a little bit political.
Well, this started like with the credit card companies saying, Visa saying, hey, we're not going to allow gun dealers to use our credit card, right? Think about what would happen. Or, we have an executive order that says this thing should not be encouraged anymore, and then the financial markets take care of it. What if Trump were president and he signed an executive order that said that the regulators should look very closely at banks that loan money for solar panels, right? I mean,
it's basically a political standpoint, encouraged view on making loans. It's not far from the idea that a governor of California says, if Walgreens is not going to sell the morning after pill or the abortion pill, then the state of California is going to penalize them.
Right.
And that's the problem when you politicize.
And see, that's a little bit different coming from the governor than it is coming from BlackRock, who says we're not going to invest in those things anymore.
Yeah.
Right? We will no longer invest in oil companies if they do oil exploration. When you see a giant like Exxon that makes statements that says we're going to curtail our investment in fossil fuels, right? Well, why are they doing that? Isn't that what their business is about?
So they get a good ESG score.
Right. And actually, these large companies have inserted themselves into proxy battles and other things to put the right people on the boards. And that's what the whole governance structure is about. And so do we want our money being used for things that are political? And I we had some really good bills come out of the legislature. There are three in particular that Senator Wilson put forward. I would seek those out and look at them because I think they're very well structured. And they had more to do with, how we invest the money from taxpayers, right? How do we discourage schemes where the financial market is used to the advantage of certain political people? And I think they were well done. They were well reasoned, and they weren't too onerous on the financial community.
Being in the legislature requires one to really look into and understand these things. But I know John would probably tell you, as I would, the more that people look into this and understand it and see what it is, look at all of it, the more they're going to, speak to legislatures and say, this is how I feel about it. We are very quick to just hear something, and if it says a word that triggers us, then we're on or we're off. We're very quick to make a decision.
Well, and one thing I would add to that really is that one of the things I've seen since I've been in the legislature is the power that citizen lobbyists have. People that show up, they show up to the sessions and they speak out. And then they go to individual representatives and senators and say, this isn't right to me. Yeah. And we have some very powerful groups now that are purely driven by citizens who want things to change for the better.
That's a lobby that we can get behind.
Yeah, it actually is. It's one that I love.
Certainly people who will take some time to watch. First of all, I'd encourage you, if you do watch, always click the like or something, an emoji of some kind, to let us know that you're watching. But also, as people watch, there's feelings that come with some of these topics. How can they talk to you? Someone might say, what did you mean by that? Or I disagree with this. Are you open to people?
Oh yeah. So I like to have those conversations. We're gonna be scheduling a bunch of town hall meetings so that we can meet with individuals. I've gotten phone calls from people. I try to answer the phone. During the session, it's really hard to answer every call, but I like to have conversations with people. I think through those conversations we can come to a mutual understanding.
And the time for momentum building when the session begins, you've kind of got the momentum there. And like you say, it's harder to get a hold of your legislator. So it's good to be involved along the way, get involved early. I can tell you from experience, John's easy to talk to. I've never had him yell at me for anything. He's a very easygoing listening ear. And quite frankly, with his experience, he's pretty wise. And this is not a paid political ad. I'm just telling you, if you want, get a hold of Senator Johnson, make sure he knows how you feel, and your legislators locally, and let them know how you feel, because that's the best ammunition anyone can have going into a legislative session. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for taking a little bit of time. More information,
Jim.
Contact Senator Johnson directly, and thanks for joining us on PoliticIt today.
Thank you.